Okay.
Okay. As I say, welcome to everyone. Are there any apologies for absence?
We've received apologies from David Halliwell, Philip Downing and Gloria Tanner.
Okay, great. Any others? No. Are there any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests? No, I take that as a no. Obviously, prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. Have you any declarations? No. There we go. We're moving on at a pace of public question time. Are there any questions? Have there any questions been received, Liz?
No, we haven't received any, Chair.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Then we get the bus services report, and we all received the bus services update on the. So thank you for that. And at this point, can I welcome Mark Thomas and Stuart and Kath. Thank you very much for taking the time out to attend. Who's going to lead on this? Mark, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, if I can just sort of briefly introduce it, Chad. I mean,
sure, yeah.
And then what we've normally done then is left it open for questions, and obviously Kath and Stuart are here. If there's any very technical questions, they will able answer them. I'm sure there's between us all. I'm sure we'll be able to address any questions or concerns that members have. Just the first section 1 is the background. Why are we here today? Well, just a reminder. I mean, it's hard to believe that it was last July that we last met. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes with the pandemic, things seem to be going quick, and other times they seem to be going very slowly. But yeah, so it's last July, and then you wrote a detailed letter in response to that meeting, because I think it was a very informative meeting. A lot of views were exchanged and a lot of detail was given. So I think it was, from what I remember, it was quite a lengthy meeting as well. But anyway, there was a lot of feedback via you, Chair. And then we addressed that in the response given then, I think it was in September. But the commitment was that we would have a follow-up meeting, and here we are. I think this was brought forward. It was meant to be a bit later, but it's been brought forward a week or two, so which is fine. But to be honest, within the last 6 months, because of the pandemic, there hasn't been huge changes in the situation as to where we were before, because there is still a lot of work going on. I'm looking at particularly in section 2.1 on cleaner fuel buses, where First Cymru have stated their intention to be a clean air operator by 2035, and that's something that is it's akin to what Welsh Government are looking to do as well. So at the moment, Welsh Government are working with local authorities, Transport for Wales and bus operators at looking at how they can help to introduce clean energy vehicles, buses, onto our highways. And at the moment, we're talking very much about setting up a pilot where we can see the benefits, the best type of routes where these would work. As we all know, the intention is certainly leaning towards the hydrogen fleet over necessarily electric, but within that requires plant to go with it. So it's not just the expense of purchasing vehicles, which are, I mean, Stuart and Catherine will be able to tell you about it. There's certainly, is it 300,000, 400,000, maybe 500,000 pounds each? They significant. One of the officers will give you the detail, but Kath and Stuart will know that. But then it's the hydrogen plant to supply the fuel to the buses as well, which isn't as yet set up in Swansea. So that's something that's got to be created. So the initial so it's not just, so one, you have an intention, a stated aim that we're going to look to have hydrogen buses on the streets, not only in Swansea, but in Wales and Southwest Wales. But then you have to look at the cost and the infrastructure that goes with it, and this is a big task. And so a lot of work, a lot of effort is being put into that as we speak. But it's not something that we're going to see this month or possibly and probably this year. But it is clear that and the Welsh Government are clear in their aims to introduce this form of technology and greener buses onto the streets of Swansea, and as I said, the wider authorities in Wales as well. So that's certainly something that's exciting, and it's something that we're going to see in as I said, in the future years. Currently, as I said, focusing on the current status of where we are with the transport within and around Swansea, we are still really under the influence of the pandemic. So although it appears that the pandemic it's certainly not, we all know it's not over, but it's waning, and the impact of it is waning. But that's not necessarily the case with the bus industry. It took a big hit when the lockdowns first came in, both through restrictions on how many people could go on a bus at a time, mask wearing, etc., but also this fear that people had of going into crowded spaces and on buses. And we saw a dramatic reduction in bus usage at the height of the pandemic. Now, that still hasn't fully recovered. I think at the time of writing of this report, I think First Cymru were reporting that numbers were only up 60% of pre-pandemic levels, so they still haven't. That, I mean, again, Kath maybe will update us and give us sort of today's set of figures on that, but it certainly was recently only recovered to 60%. There's clearly a nervousness with people still about bus travelling, and that's something that maybe is going to take a bit of time to re-establish and to get people back on board, because it's something we have to do. We cannot continue relying on the car, and Welsh Government, in fact, is driven to, absolutely, we have to make public transport more accessible, more user-friendly, and with that as well goes active travel. So it's not just the actual bus transport, it's all forms of transport to get us out of our, this the inability to sustain long-term our reliance on the car. It's that change needs to happen. And whether it happens today, tomorrow, but it's got to happen. And so, but you have to enable that to happen. So for people to really make this modal shift, as they call it, we have to provide suitable alternatives. And in fairness to Welsh Government on the bus transport system, as I reported in the last meeting, they have for the last 2 years implemented the bus emergency scheme. BES is called for short. I think there were 2 different iterations of that. And that is what has kept the bus companies able to trade effectively, because it's compensated them for the huge losses of fare paying passengers that they otherwise would have had. Without that scheme, I don't know what would have happened to many of our bus operators. And I said, that's not a Swansea obviously specific, that's an all Welsh thing. And yeah, that was vitally important, because we all know that after the end of the pandemic and we go back to normal, we all at some time or other will rely on the buses to get us to and from places of work and pleasure. The bus service network, moving on to 2.2, is, I mean, we often, I always emphasize this, I did in the last meeting. Common belief, particularly with the public, is that Swansea Council operate the bus services, because you can tell by the number of email contacts we get when certain buses are stopped or certain services are changed or restricted, then people generally come directly to the council. I know it's over 80% of our bus services are operated commercially, and by definition, they are going on the most attractive routes. So they tend to be on the busy routes because they're commercially viable, and that leaves us to pick up the pieces where bus operators tend not to operate. So that's weekend services, evening services, and out to the more outlying, less accessible districts like North Gower or parts of even the extreme ends of South Gower. So, I mean, I'm pleased to say that we as a council directly put in excess of just over 1 million, I think it's something like 1.1 million to these subsidised routes. That's topped up by Welsh Government by a further 500,000 roughly. So you know, our investment into subsidising the routes for the places that we all know need better service or need or some form of services, that's something that we are proud that we've maintained. I mean, that's not a unique situation, but there are authorities through over the last 10 years where funding has become tight and there's been restrictions on spending. Some have turned to that subsidy situation and reduced it. So I'm really pleased the fact that we've maintained that, despite it being, you know, we've certainly had to look at it on balance with our budget reductions in other services across the last 10 years. But it's something, you know, we have decided that it ranked as such a high importance that we have protected that to date. And I'm hopeful that that'll continue for years into the future. But then I suppose it's never enough, because, you know, in an ideal world, we would like to provide subsidised services to every part of Swansea at all hours of the day and weekends, and as frequently as possible. But we're eternally having this juggling act of having to, you know, to make sure that we serve as many communities as we can. But as I said, when a large, like I said, over 80% of the network is done commercially and operated by the bus companies, not us, and yet we tend to get the blame when any of them make any alterations or changes, and that's because, and it's understandable, people don't truly understand, and it's because, you know, we will pay, for example, First Cymru to run a subsidised bus service. So how would the members of the public know the differential between what is a subsidised bus service provided by First or a commercial service provided by First? So it's really understandable why people always turn to the council when there's been made changes by the transport operators. But as I said, it's something that we are proud to have maintained and kept going, and we're looking to expand as well, because one of the issues, I mean, we talk regularly to representatives of Transport for Wales as well as Welsh Government about this frustration that we all share about you know, flexible ticketing or integrated ticket system, whereby you have one commercial operator who, or you buy a ticket with them and it's not usable on another commercial operator's network. And that's under the rules. I mean, there's nothing we, again, as a council can do that. But there are plans afoot, working, as I said, with Transport for Wales, Welsh Government, about making effectively an all Wales ticketing system where you can travel by any mode of transport with one ticket, effectively. And that's something that is going to come. It's definitely, you know, in the pipeline to come. I haven't got any dates or commitment to that, but that's definitely something I think we're going to see in the short term. On top of that, then we've already had feasibility grant funding from Welsh Government to do feasibility studies in Gowden and in Pontarddulais to look in if we can set up hubs effectively that are close to the railway stations. Because what you find, and it's historic, it is, we've got a train station here and a bus station there, or a bus drop-off point there, and they're not necessarily linked together. They're quite distant, in fact, in sometimes, and that can be discouraging from getting people to use public transport from one end to the other. So by looking at, particularly, I know Gowden's a very busy railway station now, but if we can get buses to not only drop passengers off and pick them up close by the train station, but they can link in with the bus and train times, so that there's a coordinated approach, because there's no good having a train dropping somebody off and then they've got to wait 45 minutes for a bus to complete their journey, or vice versa. That's something, again, we'll be looking at it doing in Pontarddulais. So there are exciting times coming, and those are the sort of changes that need to be made so that people can leave their cars behind. Currently, people will often drive to Gowden, as we know, in the car park there, then walk to the station and catch a train. For it to be truly effective, that journey needs to be completed all on public transport and leave the car at home, sort of thing. So again, for it to work, you need a ticket when you get on the bus that you can also then get off the bus and use the same ticket on the train. And that again is going to come. So, as I said, it's exciting times ahead. I don't think there's any more I wanted to add to it, Chair, but obviously make sure there's enough time for, I'm sure there will be questions from members as well.
You're on mute, Councillor Lyndon Job.
Sorry, Stuart, Kath, do you want to add anything? Would you like to add anything, or?
I think, to be honest, Mark's given a very good coverage in terms of the situation, both the current state of play and the challenges and opportunities, really, I think, ahead. So I suppose just to add to that, the bus reviews, the network reviews and things being carried out, as I say, it's quite extensive, ties in with the metro aspirations, and yes, and hopefully some very strong opportunities ahead.
Great, thank you. Right, questions really. I'm sure there are quite a few who'd like to kick off, and we've got Chris with his hand up. Chris Holly.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mark, for your going through the report. I have to say, there are exciting times ahead with the possible hydrogen. We just know that is how that is going to play out. I don't want to talk about the metro because I've had a bad experience with that. As you all know, I think I can't carry the blame for every bloody thing on that. But anyway, that's besides the point. What I'm more concerned about is, as I said, one of the things that I know the Transport for Wales have done some sort of investigation into transport and what have you, but some of the things that I know people I've spoken to about bus travel is, one of them is totally unreliable, but we've heard the reasons for that, and I think that should improve with time. But it's also about bus stops not being waterproof, weatherproof for people who've got to get onto buses, and also if we could have more real-time bus stops. I think those are the issues would help people and increase the amount of use of buses. If I could have some questions on that, answers on that, thank you.
Great. Who wants to come back to Chris?
Well, I'll come back on it, Chair, if I will, and I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah.
Come in as well, but I can answer some. Yeah, I mean, Councillor Ollie may or may not be aware that. So in respect of the condition of bus shelters, we've recently renewed a contract with the advertising company that was responsible for, I believe it's 112 of our bus shelters. Again, Kath will tell me if I'm not exactly right. That programme is coming towards the end. So 112 of our bus shelters are being removed and then replaced. So we do, just to use this meeting to emphasise the fact that I've had some correspondence of some members, as well as members of the public, saying about where's my bus shelter gone, effectively, okay? Those bus shelters that have been removed will all be being replaced. But what it is, there's one company, the old contract company, are removing the bus shelters because they're theirs, and a different company, the new company, is coming in to replace them. So in most cases, you've got a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, maybe 4 at the most, I believe, of where the people are left, unfortunately, without a bus shelter. But that's because of, as I said, they're not our bus shelters. They belong to private companies. But as well as that, we have put in funding through the ERF. I believe it's been approved, Kath. Yes, I think it's been approved. Or has it?
It hasn't. I haven't had confirmation yet.
We haven't had confirmation, right? We have put in a funded bid then to the ERF board, because as well as those 112 bus shelters, which are going to be, so they'll be sorted out. There's 112 will be done and brand new. That leaves us with, we've got in excess of 350 bus shelters that are council owned, and we've got the responsibility. So we have put in a substantial bid to the ERF funding so that we can have finances to maintain, repair, and when necessary replace the rest of our stock. They won't all be replaced because some are 30-year-old and some are much newer than that. But to address those concerns, we have already anticipated that work needs to be done. So as I said, there's a bid. I'm fingers crossed now that I've said it publicly. Perhaps we will definitely get it approved. I don't know, but once that's done, I'm sure that'll take. I don't know if Kath wants to add anything that I've not covered.
Yeah, if I just say a little bit about the unreliability of the services, I think there has been a lot of problems with this during COVID, I think it's fair to say. Some of it was linked initially to rapid changes in the services from week to week, maybe even day to day, which the Travel Line Public Transport Information Service could not keep up with. They just couldn't keep up with the rate in which the timetables were changing. No information was published, no information was being put up at stops or anything like that for a number of reasons. But and I think even now, the bus companies are not able to sort of keep up with providing the information at the stops that they normally would do. And I think a lot of this was related to staffing issues across the board as well, because they suffered hugely with staff getting COVID, self-isolating, things like that. People weren't turning up for work in the morning. They were rushing around trying to get cover and things like that. So I know that there is unreliability out there. Where they're our contracted services, subsidised services, then obviously we are paying the bus company to do certain things, and we've got more control over them what they do in terms of penalties and financial deductions and just generally more control over the way in which they run. But as Councillor Thomas has said, the majority of services across Swansea are not funded by the council, and therefore we've got no control over them in that way. All we can do is report any issues to the Traffic Commissioner, which we do on a regular basis, and the Traffic Commissioner will then take action against them and do monitoring. That's the only thing there, is we've got limited control. The other, just to add to Councillor Thomas's thing about the bus shelters, as you say, yes, we've got 112 new shelters going in, provided by Bus Shelters Limited, which is a company based in Bridgend. We went through an open tender procedure, and the Clear Channel shelters that were out on the street, they've been there since 1993. So they are quite old and dated, and so now we are changing those. Our shelters, as we've got over 350, they're a huge mixture of perspex, glass, metal, brick, stone, they're all different types of things. We've put together this bid, and we're hopeful now that we will get some funding to replace the worst ones, and certainly to do a lot of improvements to the others where we can. In terms of real-time information, we've been installing at quite a number of key stops and shelters electronic information, but this provides scheduled information. So it's just like an electronic timetable. It's not in real time. In order to get real-time information, all the buses across the area will have to be fitted with a tracker equipment, which will allow them to talk to the bus stops, and for a calculation to be done, which will say, this bus is here, it's going to take X amount of minutes to get to this stop. We haven't got that at the moment in Swansea. The other thing is that we have been looking at other ways of providing that information, because obviously if you're providing electronic screens at a lot of stops, the ongoing maintenance cost of that is significant. So most places now tend to be using apps, mobile phone apps, so that people can sort of like track bus journeys on their phone, rather than, and that's in real time, rather than us providing a whole load of equipment at all stops. But there are certain stops and interchanges and hubs where we would certainly be looking to provide electronic information, and hopefully before too long that will be in real time. But I think that a lot of that is going to be linked to the development of the metro services across the region.
Okay, great, thank you.
Just sorry, if I could just add to that as well. We recognise with the real-time information that apps don't are not covering all the demographic that travel. It very much is the ideal would be to have real-time information, but the challenge is, as Kath said, it's not just the capital cost, but it's significant revenue, ongoing maintenance cost on there. So it is targeted to try and get the higher usage ones. And I guess rather than viewing it that we're excluding on some of the other ones, for some of the other sites, is the app brings a bit more information that we otherwise wouldn't have had. So it is recognised that sometimes either elderly or people who've got some of the challenges, it's having an app isn't necessarily what the route that they would have from a communications perspective.
Okay, great. Peter, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Lyndon. I'm interested in why people don't use buses. I know, there are a multitude of reasons, practical reasons, some of which, of course, many of which we've mentioned already in the discussion, and I mentioned, of course, in the very good report as well. But I grew up in the late 1950s, early 1960s, when bus use was far, of course, more common, far fewer people owned cars, and people from all sorts of backgrounds would use the buses to get from A to B. That, of course, has been replaced now by the great car culture of the 70s and 80s. And I can recall Margaret Thatcher saying at some point, anyone who gets to the age of 30 and is still using the buses has somehow failed in terms of their achievement in life and so forth. And that is a problem, I think. I don't know whether it is a problem, but I think it probably is a problem. The problem of attitude towards bus use. Some people, of course, use buses because they've no alternative. Students, elderly people, people on low incomes who maybe don't afford cars or don't have cars for whatever reason. But we've seen in London, for example, that younger people in London are choosing not to buy cars, but instead to use the excellent public transport system that's available to them. Obviously, not just buses, but also the metro and so forth. But we don't have that latter option as yet here in Swansea. So I'm wondering, alongside all the practical difficulties of reliability and so on and so forth, there is a culture of maybe not using buses, a culture of acquiring a car and then using that car for anything and everything, and doing so quite unreasonably. What can we do to change that? How can we make bus use in Swansea sexy, saleable, whatever word you want to use to attach to it? Because I think that's part of the problem. Yes, we've got to improve the services, make them more reliable, make them more frequent, and so on and so forth, make them more widespread in provision. But we've also got to change, I think, the attitude of some sections of society, perhaps, towards bus use. Bus use is for everyone, not just for particular categories who are in some way or other prevented from owning a car. And that's what we've got to change, because that then links back into the climate change narrative. I know we're going to get more electric vehicles and so forth, but nevertheless, fossil fuel. Even beyond that, I think it was a matter of getting people out of cars and into buses and other forms of public transport, not least for reasons of congestion and delay and so forth, so that even if we do get an electric car culture, I think there are still going to be practical reasons for trying to dissuade people from buying into that so much. So what is it that we can do? What do we know about people who don't use the bus system even when they could? And what can we do to change that? So that's a big issue, I know, Linda, and I apologise for it. But that, I think, is that there's a fundamental problem, beyond the practical difficulties of why do people no longer use buses? Thank you.
I think Stuart wants to come in, but before he does, in London, I know, because friends of mine do it, you've got the ability to hire a car for a few hours. And if you've then got to move something and pick something up from a DIY shop, you may hire a car for about 3 hours and so on. And that is something that happens in London. So that's an interesting development there. And, maybe it'll catch on in this neck of the woods, but it certainly works there. Stuart, do you want to come in and answer?
Yeah, I'm not coming in with the answer because I'm afraid I haven't got the answer, but certainly some observations, if that's okay. It's a good point where you're saying, Councillor Jones, there as well, that about the car clubs and different things, because I think, you know, the reliance on the car is very strong for those who can afford it, etc. And getting those people out of the cars is very you know, is a very challenging one. But it's having a kind of a mixed economy, which includes things like car clubs, so people can have other travel options. Is if they get rid of a car, they can still have access to a vehicle when they need it in an easy way. I think what's very clear is that with the kind of, I guess, the climate crisis and the whole pressures on sustainability, if everyone switches across to having their own electric car, that will not be the solution in terms of on there. You know, there are so many things from not just the manufacturing, but the operation, everything of there, that if we're serious about it, there's going to have to be a lot more sort of shift towards you know, different forms of public transport, so sort of mass transit and different things, systems, and active travel and things on there. So it is a very good question about, you know, the non-users, because it's that thing, isn't it? If we carry out a survey of users, well, it's not so much the users we always want to get to. You can stand at the bus station and question those people who use the bus, but it's how you get to those people who don't use the bus. And it has to be a real mix of sort of carrots and sticks being used at the timely point, I guess, in order to encourage that shift. Some of it is down to maybe where people can penetrate to in the towns and city centres, how convenient it is. It's certainly down to, you know, people don't, at the moment, it's a bit of a minefield with ticketing and things, because you almost need a kind of a degree in bus ticketing to know which is the best fare to get for what journey, depending if you're going anywhere else and whether you're going to use it later in the week, or if you know. But I think simplifying that with some of the things that Councillor Thomas talked about with tap on, tap off systems, or, you know, tickets that cover multiple modes. You have better integration between, you know, car clubs, trains, cycling, you know, in terms of cycle infrastructure and everything. So it's a much more, I guess, publicly acceptable and convenient mode that's got that level of integration. So I think it is, you know, there's a lot of different things that have to be done, and some of it is very much, as you say, the legacy of some of the Margaret Thatcher statements have not helped it. It's sort of, I guess, almost developed a class system of, you know, those who, you know, either public transport users or you've got the car, and it kind of, you know, the legacy of these things can sometimes, you know, give a hangover. But there's the quality of the public transport that we're offering, and there's the image very much of it as well, and I think some of it is down to, you know, making it an attractive through marketing, through, you know, making people feel as if, you know, as if sitting on the bus isn't a sort of statement on your you know, position in society or whatever. I think there are a lot of issues to grasp. So certainly haven't given the answer, but just I guess some observations.
But thank you, Stuart. I mean, you may think you've not given the answer, but I think you've gone quite a long way in pointing up some of the issues. I would just add, in terms of electric vehicles, we need to overcome the idea that may have gained possession in the general public, that somehow an electric vehicle is carbon free. It isn't, of course. The carbon cost of producing the battery, the carbon cost associated with the vehicle itself can be, in fact, I read a report recently, higher than is true for a fossil fuel vehicle. So we need to encourage people not to think, oh, well, I'll get an electric car and then I'm doing my bit for the climate, because you're not. Thank you anyway. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Lots of hands up, but can I, Mark, that's Councillor Mark Thomas, would you like to come in first, and Kath?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat. I mean, Stuart touched on, and I suppose the simple answer is, Peter asked the question, you know, what is it, what's behind it, and it's clearly not just one thing. I mean, look, but I can relate to some of the comments that he raised and that and Stuart answered. I've certainly heard in my time as a ward councillor and as a member of the family, people almost brag about the fact that they've never been on a bus. I've heard people actually say, well, I've never been, and they're proud to say they've never been on a bus. So go into this macho, sexy, I don't know what it is. I don't profess to know the history behind it. I've certainly known many people who will say, I've not caught a bus for 10 years. And be proud to say they've not caught a bus for 10 years. You know, so, but one example I can think of, you know, sort of colloquially is a resident living in my ward. I was having a conversation with her. She's a pensioner and with a free bus pass. And she was proud to tell me that she never catches the bus, which I always found strange because it was free. She used her car to go to Swansea or wherever. And she, the throwaway comment of, well, why don't you catch the bus? It's so convenient. There's an hourly service from Northgower. You know, it stops almost outside her house and she could catch the bus. It's literally across the road and drop her off. Oh, I'm not getting on a bus. It takes forever. So I said, what do you mean it takes forever? So the point I'm making here is perception, you know. What do you mean it takes forever? It's over an hour, she said, to get on a bus. I haven't got the time to be on a bus for over an hour. Well, it doesn't. It takes 40 minutes. But she firmly believed that, but without knowing, and I think that, I doubt if that's a one-off comment. I think there's this perception that buses are slow, they're late, they're inconvenient, they're bumpy, they're uncomfortable. There's loads of perceptions that we have to get over, you know, and to use Peter's analogy of sexy, we have to make public transport sexy again. And I don't profess to have the answers, but I think particularly with the green fleet, when it becomes green, then green is a sexy word to use now in attracting people to that. So I think that's a wonderful opportunity to get people to change their perception about travelling by bus. So if you had reservations before, do your bit, do the good thing, do the green thing, and use the buses. And so I think there's a wonderful opportunity coming there. But as I said, there's probably 20 reasons behind it all. But thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Kath, do you want to come in? And then obviously there's Paul and Mike.
Okay. Yeah, I think you know, some of the things that we learned from previous experience, when some members will probably remember a number of years ago when we developed the Gower Explorer bus network, and we learned a lot there on what attracts people to bus services, and how to grow patronage. And the elements of that, I think, were that we had a timetable which suited people. It didn't change. There was a stable timetable for long periods of time, so people could plan their journeys well in advance. The frequency of the service was important. The quality of the vehicles was also important. And information, we did a lot on the way in which information was provided, even down to doing bespoke timetables for the little villages and things around the area. People were coming to that area on holiday. They wanted to make plans and things like that. They didn't want to use their cars at all. We did that. Ticketing is a massive thing. It's very complicated. Cost can be high unless you understand all the options that are available to you. Journey times, as Councillor Thomas has said, is something that people tend to think that they're going to take longer. And we try to do quite a lot with speeding up bus journeys in Swansea, you know, by sort of bus priority and things like that. But promotion is also, and changing people's perception is going to be a massive issue. And I think with that one, it's promoting the sort of things that you can do if you travel by bus, in terms of, for instance, if you want to use your laptop, if you want to use your mobile phone, if you want to text, send messages, emails and things like that, you can do that on a bus, because a lot of them have got Wi-Fi. People don't realise that. You know, you can't do that if you're driving or commuting long distances, but you can do it. It's like being on a train, isn't it, in that regard? So I think those are the sort of things, and I think the Welsh Government are trying to promote this with the Metro. They're calling it one network, one timetable, one ticket. That's what their aim is, and I think that encapsulates what, you know, we would like to see in terms of bus services, not just in Swansea, but across the whole of the country, really. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Kath. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Kath just started to answer one of my points I was going to make. There are, for Mark as well, I mean, there are some trials going on, particularly in Wales, in regards of through ticketing. North Wales is this one bus BWS ticket. This is one of the big complaints you get. If I want to go to Gower, I got to catch a bus from here to the city centre on First Cymru, then pay for another ticket on another operator, and that's what it is, putting people off. So that experiment is taking place in North Wales, and in I think it's Newport, there is a trial going on of bus train through ticketing. So that's something we perhaps could be looking at as well, and joining up services there. And I'm going to throw this one in, it's naughty, but last week you had the ruling in the High Court on Andy Burnham's quest to run their own services in Manchester. Until now, that's not been possible because of the legislation. Well, they won that day in court. I wonder what our thoughts are now, early, I understand, on where do we go now? Because it already exists in Wales, whereby the transport is devolved. And I wonder what the thoughts will be within our council and possibly in the Welsh Government on how that has opened up the door to many opportunities for us to get a far better service, to regulate the service, and say to these operators, I'm sorry, you're going to have to do what we want you to do instead of what you would like to do. And I believe there's an opportunity there for us to really move on with this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mike.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, coming back to what similar what I was saying, it's great that slogan, Kath. One ticket, that's excellent. It sounds good. But what I'm saying, what I was going to ask was, if we, as a council, if we envisage any bumps in the road, obviously, to get the cooperation between the train and bus companies, I think that's I think that the nut that we got to crack, really, isn't it? To make sure that we get the cooperation, and I'd be interested to hear our views on that. And secondly, in regards to the with the connections between the obviously the bus and the train as well, obviously with the ticketing as well, I think that's important that that if we are going to have this service, which the Welsh Government are hopefully going to roll out and promote, is that we have got the systems in place that would accept the cross ticketing, and also the timetables to match with it. I think if this is going to work, I think those are the two main strands that we really should have in place. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. I think Kathy, is that historic? Your hand up, or but could I get Mark to come in? Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, Paul's point there about the trials going on in North Wales and that. Yeah, and that's exactly what all the points we've raised now and what's in the report about the moves afoot, they are all being done with the full involvement and of Transport for Wales and Welsh Government. So this isn't just talk from a local authority point of view to sort of appease people. This is definitely happening. And the cornerstone, in fact, Stuart, Kath and myself were at a regional meeting last week when a presentation from Transport for Wales. And that's where we emphasised a lot of the infrastructure, for example, going back to the technology about hydrogen buses. That isn't something that's going to happen in the next few months or the next year because of all the infrastructure that needs to be developed to support that. Cross-ticketing and integrated ticketing systems is something that I certainly believe can be delivered and can be delivered relatively quickly, and the technology already exists. This is not about inventing the wheel. The reason I keep mentioning Transport for Wales and Welsh Government is because even if those systems existed, we as a local authority could not use them effectively. We certainly cannot influence cross-ticketing between a bus operator in Swansea and a train company. So, but Transport for Wales can do that, and Welsh Government can do that and can legislate to make that happen, because look, at the moment, it's very difficult when you've got two commercially, competing operators on buses, and you're trying to talk and persuade them to accept each other's tickets. You're not on very furtive discussion ground. But when that comes as part of whether it's through a franchising operation or whatever, then that is what will be done. I mean, part of the new setup with Transport for Wales, which may incorporate franchising, so companies will have to bid for franchises to run bus services, then that franchise will say, in order to win this franchise, you will do these are the grounds for that franchise. So, I mean, in answer, I know Councillor Lloyd asked about what does this rule in? We haven't discussed it internally yet because it was only last week. So I don't honestly know the impact of that High Court ruling and what it means to us about running our own. But as an administration, we've long had aims to run our own bus company and been prevented to do so. We were pinning our hopes on this new change and new involvement of Transport for Wales to make sure that the bus services reflected what people want. They weren't just, they are meant to be a public service, and that's what I think all of us councillors and the public would like to see more of, as opposed to commercial services. So I think that, as I said, whether they change through the Transport for Wales and Welsh Government approach that they're working on currently, or franchising, or whether we as an authority or any other authorities go down the route of running their own services now that the shackles are off, sort of thing. And I think when Councillor White mentioned about cooperation between bus companies and the trains, that's exactly the point. That will be legislated, Mike, so that it's we as a standalone authority could never get that change. So it has to come from the top down and working with us. I mean, this is not just imposition coming from Welsh Government and Transport Wales to local authorities. This is something very much we are working closely with them because we've made that point from the start. We know best. We know the people of Swansea, and this goes for every authority is saying the same. You have to work with us to make sure that the change in the bus setup and the bus provision and train provision is with the full involvement and active interest of local authorities, because we know what's best for our area. So, yeah, but it is coming. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Mark. Mike, is that historic with your hand up, or? Ah, there we are. Before I call Kath, can I just throw a couple in? You mentioned the hydrogen buses. Obviously, at £400,000 a piece, they're not going to happen anytime soon, really, with the actual nature of the cost of them, really. So, are there going to be electric buses in the meantime, which obviously would cost less? But I think, say, waiting for hydrogen buses, we might be waiting for quite a while. We may get like one or two, but we're not going to get a fleet of them, are we really? So there's that point I'd make. If you go to London, you buy an Oyster card and you can jump from the train to the bus, and it works. So they've got the system and they've got the thing how it works. And if you think of London, there are a range of different transport operators there, and you can use that on them. And I certainly know Bristol are looking to do that if they haven't already started it. So it is actually happening. So you've got the model out there of how it works, and maybe we could be, or we should be looking at that to see, and mirroring it, because it works really well. And everybody who gets an Oyster card, I've got one, you pay a £5 for the card, so that covers the cost of infrastructure, setting it up, giving the card out, and so on, and you get that £5 back at the end of it all, if you remember, when you're not going to use it. So they get that investment, and yeah, you can use anything. The other sort of flashpoint, I would think, we mentioned the bus emergency support, which was vital. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any buses running, as Mark absolutely said. But obviously, when this comes to an end in July, that's going to be a bit of a flashpoint. How are you going to get a transition from that with and without? And I know the point you make, about the 60% of people now using. I think in Bishopston, in my ward, we were down to 30% usage. You know, and elderly people were nervous to go into Swansea, and so on. So that is another point, really. So yeah, sorry about that. Kath and then Stuart then. But if you...
Okay. So to come back to some of the points you've raised, Councillor Jones, in terms of the hydrogen bus it's a trial that the Welsh Government are looking at, and they're looking at a trial in the Swansea Bay area and in Pembrokeshire. So they're looking at specific routes, strategic routes, and they are looking at procuring the hydrogen buses, testing them out to see how they work, because I think one of the disadvantages with electric buses particularly is because they're heavy duty services. If you're going on routes which are very long, then you've got issues about recharging the vehicles on during the day, during the service and things like that. Hydrogen, they feel, is much more suitable for heavy duty bus corridors, and they want to try it out. So they are leading, Welsh Government are leading on this particular project, and they're looking at what sort of buses, where would they run, how often would they run, who would own them, would the bus companies own them, would local authorities look after them, would the Welsh Government look after them, all sorts of things like that. So there's quite a lot of governance and things around this project, which is why it's taken a little while to get it set up. They're looking at sources of hydrogen. Where would they come from? Would they be green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, different types of things like that? So there's a lot of sort of facets to this, but it is moving relatively quickly because the Welsh Government has shown a commitment to it. So I think, it is going to happen, but it takes a while to get going.
The other thing is, of course, on hydrogen is the safety aspect, not least on the bus itself, because obviously buses unfortunately do have a crash every now and again.
Yeah.
But also where it's stored.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it could be, dare I say, pretty explosive. So
Yeah.
it needs to be absolutely safe, actually, and that is, it was, yes, but it can cause and create other problems, really.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that I mean, obviously depot facilities is an issue, as you've just highlighted, because at the moment, we've got diesel buses running. Then sort of like, what if you've got hydrogen buses and you've got diesel buses? Where are they going to be able to work out to the same depot? You're going to have to have different depots. Where would they be? That type of thing. The other thing is Oyster card. You mentioned Oyster card. And I think that the way that works in London is because the services in London are franchised. They're all under Transport for London. They're all subsidised services. So that, that franchising system is something that the Welsh Government are looking at under the new legislation that they're putting together now. And that would effectively then take the control of the whole of the bus network away from the commercial bus operators and place it under public sector control. So that, how that's going to be funded and things like that is another issue, but that's what they're looking at the moment. And if you've got the franchise control over the network, then obviously things like ticketing and timetabling and information becomes easier to manage because it's all under public sector control. And then the Welsh Government and local authorities, CJCs, would develop packages of franchises for the services they want, and operators would bid for them. So, that's the way it would work then. So they are looking at that. When you've got that sort of system, like in London, you can do the sort of like ticketing because all the services are under the public sector control. And in London, they're moving now from Oyster card, issuing Oyster cards. You can get them, but they're moving away. The cheapest option now is to use contactless cards, debit cards, credit cards, and you literally tap on, tap off. And that's something that the Welsh Government, Transport for Wales, are trialling now in the southeast, and they're starting to do a trial with First Cymru on some services now. So that's literally tap on, tap off. They record the journeys that you've made through the day, and you're charged the most economic fare overall. Ultimately, that's the way they're going with that. So rather than have to go through all this thing about issuing people with Oyster cards and you literally use cards you've already got to make your journeys. In terms of the bus emergency scheme, we've just had a letter through today from the Deputy Minister, which is confirming that they are looking at extending financial support to bus companies beyond July. So that's all he says at the moment. We've literally had that today, saying that they are looking at extending, because I think they realised that they never thought it was going to take this long for the bus industry to recover. In terms of sort of the recovery position, I thought perhaps it would be helpful if I just gave you a little bit of a sort of update of where we are. So at the moment, the current network coverage is 80% of what it was in 2020. Current passenger numbers are 60% of what they were in 2020. And very interestingly, concessionary passengers are 50% of what they were in 2020, and that's at the moment. So there is a big sort of issue in terms of encouraging people back to public transport, and particularly I think older people and people who've got concessionary bus passes, because they're obviously not travelling like they used to before. Now that could be for all sorts of reasons. I think a lot of them got out of the habit of going out and about, and there's still people who are very nervous about travelling as well. So there's a lot of work to do there. In Swansea, student travel is a sort of big part of the bus sort of numbers. And when the students came back to lectures, the numbers were about 35 to 40% of 2020 numbers travelling, and now they're up to 55%. So there's still a lot less students travelling than there were before, but hopefully come September this year, then the numbers will pick up and be a bit more akin to what they were before. So we see, but yeah, I hope that's helpful in terms of putting things in context. I don't know if you want me to say anything about the Municipal Bus Company thing. In terms of that again is something that's being looked at as part of the legislation review. Welsh Government are very keen to encourage the development of municipal bus companies, and local authorities getting involved in that. At the moment, the 1985 Transport Act actively discourages the development and setup of municipal bus companies. It's extremely difficult to do. Competition law sort of doesn't incentivize it at all either. So but yes, they are looking to do that, because there are occasions, I think, when local authority owned bus companies may be required, because effectively we would be the operator of last resort. So if there is no bus companies who can pick up work within your area, then an authority could have the ability to run services themselves then, if there's nobody else who can do it. And I think some authorities are looking at that now, because they're facing challenges, particularly in rural areas where there are no real school transport or local public transport operators. The numbers have gone down significantly, and they are having to sort of step in and cover sort of like essential services.
Great, thank you. One of the points that the numbers are probably down is as well is reliability. And I know certainly from my experience with the number 14 route, which has now been taken over by NAT,
yeah.
There are still some issues. They're far better than First Cymru, but there are issues. And they get into the bus station and they're at the wrong space for the bus to go out and so on, or they go out from another area, or the bus doesn't turn up. And I know that in the village I had a call a little while, about a fortnight ago, where a bus didn't turn up, and there were about 5 people on different routes from Pennard to the Males were going to meet in Swansea for a bit of an afternoon and something to eat, and ended up by having to get a taxi in. And so on. So they said, well, they're not going to look for a bus anytime soon. you know, when you get that, and I've had a number of instances like that, and because of that unreliability, you know, it does deter people.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stuart's got his hand up.
Yes, I think certainly Kath has had a pretty comprehensive cover. Just a couple of things. I think you're right. The experience, you know, there have been some challenges, with driver numbers, etc. With COVID, it's you know, and a whole host of things recently. But when someone does get a bad experience, you know, it can put them off for a long time, and trying to get them back on board is a real challenge on there. I suppose just covering again on that point of hydrogen, you know, we can't buy overflow buses. Well, yeah, I mean, Welsh Government are currently, you know, circa just for the Swansea area, looking at potentially up to about 50 buses, and I think that, you know, it's very keen to sort of, you know, move ahead with that. You were saying about safety issues and things. There are a number of sort of hydrogen buses in operation. I think Aberdeen is one of the ones that's been in operation probably for a few years now.
Yeah.
Actually, they've been very much the sort of test bed of the operation. So so I think, you know, there is a real appetite for doing a you know, a bit of a mix, I think, in terms, as you say, that the electric buses will be something, but electric buses themselves are, to be honest, there's not a lot in it price wise, because I think it's something in the region of electric buses are over 400,000 or something, and well, the hydrogen buses are circa about 500, I think, or something. So they, you know, they're certainly, you know, a lot of money, but it just it's the most suitable mode depending on the type of journeys they're undertaking. So I think, you know, but there is a real desire, as I say, from Welsh Government to move with this, and the fueling and something, as well as the actual purchase of the buses, the fueling and things is something that they're you know, looking into at pace. I think just to, you know, I don't know, Kath mentioned about the green or blue hydrogen. I think on there, the just, I guess, for information, a lot of you may already know, but I guess the utopia is green hydrogen, which is basically hydrogen that is produced from entirely sustainable modes. So either, you know, wind farms, solar panels, or other, you know, fully sustainable modes that are being used to produce hydrogen. That is what people are hoping for, because the blue hydrogen, although, you know, emission wise it's great, it requires energy, and it's what's been used to produce that. So so yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, I know we've got to move on to look at discussions and conclusions, but could I thank Mark? Thank you very much for taking the time, as always, to help and join us, and to Kath and to Stuart as well. Thank you very much indeed. And I think you can escape now, which is
okay. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you all.
Great, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
There we go. Well, that was all very interesting. The next thing now, we've got to look at any conclusions we want to make, so that we can sort of get a note to the to Mark. But that was quite interesting, actually, quite informative about what was going on and plans as well. Any thoughts, anyone? Linda?
Well, basically, there seems to be a lot of plans and projects for the future and improvements, but just at the moment, I'm not seeing a lot of improvement from what there was 7-8 years ago in the actual day-to-day running.
Yeah, okay, that's a point that we could, you know, we all reflect, really, is the points that we've made about reliability and everything else, and that's certainly the case. Is there anything anybody wants to say about the 2013 inquiry? Because I think it was mentioned that not all of it had been adhered to. I think Mark was saying that it had. And I looking at this, there was only one point that was partially agreed, but otherwise it had been. but we're saying really, despite that inquiry, we're still getting that unreliability, and we're not getting the service that the public actually want and deserve. And of course, if we're going to get the numbers up on the bus, it's a chicken and egg, isn't it, really? Unless you've got that reliability, you're not going to get the people going onto the bus.
Yeah, you're right there, Chair. Sorry, Peter, you got your hand up. Sorry, go on, Peter.
Peter, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Just the point that I made during the discussion about trying to make use of buses more attractive to people who at present, for whatever reasons, are not using the system. We've used the word making the system more sexy. But I think the point should be made, I think, in our comments back to the Cabinet member that it's not just the issue of problems, of practical problems of usage, frequency, and so on and so forth. There is a wider issue of public attitude to bus use. And I think we need some creative thinking there in terms of how we can persuade people to make bus use a more normal part of their daily activity. I mean, one issue, of course, is the climate issue and trying to discourage people from using their cars. But we've also got to go beyond that, I think, and to the point of saying, well, why is actually bus use a good thing to do anyway? I'm not sure if I'm expressing this very well. I hope I'm getting the point across. Perhaps Liz can do it better than I can, that there is an issue there that I think we've somehow got to address. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, I was just about to say we are at I think a position where we cannot go any from until legislation changes and regulations reintroduced. And talking of getting people back on to use services, I'm afraid that they don't fit. They don't fit people's work patterns. They still logged in the past. People are now working 12-hour shifts, 6 till 6, 3 till 3. Some people work, and yet you will not get a service to get you to work there until they're made to do it. So everything has to change. Chicken and egg, you said, yes, it is. And how do we chicken and egg, carrot and stick? How do we load that? It has to be first. You've got to provide a good service, my friend. And my friend being the operators. And until that is put in place, then I think you will see the shift.
Because we literally moved from a nationalised system to a monopoly, and that's not healthy. No. You know, and you know, obviously companies will only give up their position. You know, give up a route like they did with the number 14 because it wasn't making money. It wasn't worth their while. But and then, you know, Nat came in. But that's you know, really a route. We should be able to take a route from somebody, or somebody else should be able to go in and do that route if need be. You know, but it is an issue. The other thing is, when people do, I know people have mentioned it to me, when they go shopping, one of the reasons they don't use the bus is that they go around the shops, they're getting different things in each shop, and what do you do with it all? Now, whether you get a system where you get lockers at a bus station or like in the quadrant, so that people can put their parcels in there and then pick them up on the way back. So in other words, they've made a couple of journeys to the locker, and it's all there, but rather than have to carry this hoard of stuff around all the afternoon or whatever, you can do that quietly, pick it up and move it in. And maybe that would be a helpful use. I know they've got them in some stations where you can do that, but I think they need to be a bit more readily available, really. And I think people might jump on it.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, and then while you're saying about monopolies, because of the high profit margins that these companies are setting their companies, like First is a multinational company, so is Nat, by the way, and Stagecoach and Arriva and all that, is that then those companies will only chase profitable routes. so then you're left with the councils having to tender these services, and so the profit levels that some of these companies are expected to work to cannot be achieved, and yet they still keep chasing it. So it's something that will have to be looked at as well. And by the way, even when they were state-owned, they were still expected to turn out, by law, 6% profit, which was doable because of cross-subsidising, because there were plenty of things to back it up. But now each service is running itself, has to stand alone, which causes the problem.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you, Chair.
appreciate that. I think it's very often you could cross-subsidise a route. In other words, the one to Bishopston isn't making a money at the moment. See, the one to Mumbles is making a load of money. You lose one for the other, and totally appreciate that. But Mike, been patiently waiting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so they say, we've obviously tried to stick in the carrot approach. The main thing is, as they say, the bus companies come back, we want the service provided. First thing they're going to ask, we need more money, subsidies to keep, if you want that route operating. As I say, it's all about the profit end for the shareholder things. But as I say, I think the concern here is that we definitely need proper legislation where we can actually all these companies to be accountable, to provide services. And I don't know whether we can have any sort of impact on them actually, given the stats on because I've never seen a survey being handed out on the bus. And what do you think of the bus service? Quality of service. But I think my main concern is that, clearly as a council, our hands are tied in a sense, because we obviously need new legislation to give us powers, and we can hold these bus companies to account.
Yeah, but I think it's important as well that there should be regular meetings between councillors and the bus companies. They should be happy to come and meet councillors, because you know your wards best, and you know what the issues are and where there's a problem, and therefore I think we should recommend there is that sort of link. And those meetings are set up, and I don't mean large meetings, small meetings. So because when you get too large a meeting, the bus company immediately find themselves backed into a corner perhaps, whereas if you just one or two people talking to them, well, you can talk more freely. And I think, but there is need for that dialogue. I think that is important. The other thing Mark mentioned was the bus stops, but some are pretty poor state as well. The ones outside that, and I think they need to be. I've certainly arranged the cleaning of bus stops and things, and signposts, and they certainly need to be cleaned up a bit, because it's doing our bit as well. Because if the customers, the passenger, waiting in a filthy environment, and some can be pretty dirty, it's not good either.
Can I just say, Chair, as well? It's all, if we could set meetings up within wards, that's great, But then again, if we do have these meetings, that the bus companies come forward with information that is true and is transparent. You know what I mean? Because they can come forward with information, and and we don't know if that information is accurate. You know what I mean? But I think that's important as well.
No, absolutely right. I think, isn't it really? We ultimately want one thing: a really good bus service for local people. First, second, third, and fourth. Really, that's it. Therefore, we'll work with them to help them to achieve that. But for that, you do need that information, the proper information, so that should be shared, so that you can see what the position actually is, and work with it. But the thing that a number of us had mentioned was reliability as well. And at the moment we're not getting that reliability, obviously that is key to people using the route. And also the point that Paul made was the fact around the timings as well, because if people are going to work early in the morning, well, Linda and I, you know, councillors, that could be a problem, and they've got to find another way in, you know, really to work, and that's not great. But yeah, okay. I think we've got a bit there to put a note together for Mark. And has anybody got anything else they'd like to add? So we can let Peter escape to his garden. And all of us. Yeah, there we are. Well, listen, kind of thank you all very much. I think it's been interesting, and the follow-up was really good as well. We had some good messages, you know, back as well, and things that were happening, and things, you know, obviously listening to what we had to say as well, which is important. And I've always, to be fair, I've always found Mark Thomas extremely good in that regard.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.